Getting a job as a C# developer takes a plan. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of wasted time aimlessly applying and getting rejected over and over. In this video, we're going to establish a clear plan that you can execute effectively. Along the way, I'll show you how to perform each step to ensure that you are successful. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and I train real-world ready software developers, both here on YouTube and on my own training site. Here on YouTube, you can find over 700 videos on C# and the related topics, including 6 free courses and a podcast focused on the questions software developers have that aren't specifically answered with code samples. On my training site, I have courses that focus on in-depth, real-world training to get you career-ready quickly. Either way, my goal is to help you become the developer you have always wanted to be. So let's start today by talking about the employment life cycle. So these are the steps you need to take in a cycle over and over again, pretty much for the rest of your career. So let's start with you need to build some skills, okay? In order to get employed, you have to build skills. And from that, you need to build experience. Now, you can't get experience until you have the skills, but once you have the skills, you need to work on getting experience in that. Now, this video is going to tell you how to do all 4 of these steps, by the way. So, skills, experience, then you need to put that into a portfolio. And you might say, well, Tim, I'm going to skip that step. I don't need a portfolio. Well, how do you show off that you can do something? How do you prove that you are different than everybody else? Because the problem is it's very easy to say, I know C#. And since that's very easy to say, a lot of people say it. What you need to do is prove that you know C#. And the way to do that is to have some type of code sample to say, see, here's my proof that I know C# well. Okay, so portfolio. After that, you add that to your resume. You continue to build your resume. These 4 categories, you need to be building up equally in your life. Oftentimes, people focus on just the skills. They say, oh, I'm going to get more skills. I'm going to watch more videos. I'm going to train more. Well, that's great, and that does add value usually, although too many simple skills or too broad of a skill range isn't as helpful as you might think it is. But it's not just about having the skills, because that's what a lot of people do. They just get the skills and then say, why is no one hiring me? And the reason why is because you've skipped the other 3 steps. Or maybe you've gone from skills to resume and back and forth, and you're like, why is this not working? You need to get experience, and experience doesn't come from just watching tutorials. It comes from hard work. Okay? You need to build things that are in some way relevant, that are in some way deeper than Hello World or that tutorial that you saw. You need to go beyond those things. Okay? You need to show off how you can do it. So this cycle, over and over again, you're filling all 4 of these buckets. So over and over again, you want to fill these 4 buckets. So let's talk about how to even get started in the skills process. And to do that, I want you to start with market research, because I can tell you what the best things are for you, and quite frankly, I have done that. And we'll talk more about that. I've laid out for you the path over and over again. Here's what to do in what order. But it does depend somewhat on your area. Not the general stuff, but more specifically what types of things you need depend on your area. So first, start by finding the attainable jobs in your area. Now, you don't want to look for a senior developer role if you're a junior developer. You don't want to look for junior developer roles if you're a mid-level developer. You want to find the attainable jobs that work for you in your area. Now, from that, you don't apply yet. What you want to do is you want to identify the key technologies that are required in those jobs. Okay? The technologies that are required, the technologies that are preferred, the technologies that are hoped for in those jobs. Then I want you to create a list of the most common technologies that have been asked for. Sometimes you'll see technologies and you're like, I've only seen that once. Well, maybe don't study for that one because it's one particular job, but it's not going to give you a leg up in a number of jobs. So you want to make sure you find what are the most common things in these lists. And then you want to group technologies by type. So when you're thinking about these different technologies you found, you want to kind of group them by, okay, this says C#, this says .NET, this says, .NET or C#. Like you kind of combine them together and say, okay, that is all lumped into this category. So you can think through these as bigger groups than just a very specific C# or .NET Framework 4.7.2. Okay, that may be just .NET Framework. Okay, so group technologies by type, and then prioritize the list. So you're going to create a prioritized list based upon what is most relevant. Like maybe every job has asked for this technology. That might be a higher priority on your list. You also want to prioritize based upon where you're at in your development journey. If you are just starting off in C#, then you probably shouldn't put things that are advanced technologies high on the list, not before learning C# itself, object-oriented programming, and the foundational stuff you need to from C#. Okay, prioritize the list by what you want to do as well. So maybe people ask for certain things and you're like, I don't want to do that. Well, then don't put that in the priority list. Instead, prioritize higher the things that are more important to you. And then, again, look at those job listings and say, hey, with this priority list, if I have these first three, how many jobs would I start to be able to apply for? Okay. Now, also on this priority list, you're going to want to check off things you've already done. Like there's some things that you may be qualified for already. Cool. That's awesome. Moved on to the next things. All right. So that's market research. Let's take a pause right here and do some of that. Okay. So let's jump out of PowerPoint and get into, this is Indeed. Now I want to encourage you. I'm looking at Indeed for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I am located near the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I'm looking for a junior .NET developer. But people often say, oh, well, there's only so many jobs in the area. This is a small fraction of the job openings in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Just because, and it does say 200 plus, that's great, but it's a small fraction. Not everyone puts their job posting on Indeed. There's other places as well, and it's not always they even put it on a job board. Often companies will put it on their own internal or own website job board, and they don't use an external job board, which, yes, that's frustrating because you have to look into a lot of places. But just don't get confused into thinking that if it's not on Indeed, it's not a job posting. There's job postings all over, not just with Indeed. We're just going to use Indeed because this is going to be a representative sample for you. Now, what I've got over here is a notepad. We're going to type in some of the things we find based upon this search. Now, we're not going to type everything, and we're going to be kind of selective about what we do and don't look for. And just to be clear, these specific jobs are just representative of jobs that you'd find in your area. I'm not going to, I may say some things about certain job postings. It's just an overall commentary. It's not about that specific listing. Okay, so let's start off with this junior application developer. By the way, I searched for junior .NET developer. That does not mean all these jobs will be junior, and it does not mean that all these jobs will be .NET developers. You've got to work through that. That's okay. So junior .NET developer, and there's some about information about that. Not really that relevant. So we can skip down to really the qualifications and desired qualifications. Okay, so they're asking for a associate's or bachelor's in computer science, MIS, math, engineering, or other technical discipline before they start the job. Okay, the first thing right off the bat here, you might say, well, I don't have a degree in one of those things. Not really a problem. Okay, a lot of companies anymore are saying or relevant experience, or they just kind of skip over that for the right candidate. So this is not a deal breaker. And you might say, but Tim, it's in the qualification list, not the desired qualification list. That's true, but just because here doesn't mean if you don't have it, you don't get in. Okay, hands-on experience in C#, .NET, .NET Core is a plus. Okay, so we're gonna write this down. C#, .NET, .NET Core, which, by the way, .NET is .NET Core. So when you see .NET Core, you might want to say, oh, well, what does that mean? That means the latest .NET, which means that this .NET right here might actually mean .NET Framework. Okay, it's important to know these things. All right. Now, also, we're going to get to this later, but when I talk about customizing your resume, which I'll say over and over again, it's important because whoever wrote this job posting used these words, .NET, .NET Core. Okay, so when you want to put your resume in, you want to make sure your resume says .NET Core and .NET. Okay, you don't want it to say .NET and .NET Framework because they're going to say, well, we really want somebody that knows .NET Core. You're like, but that is .NET. You don't want to have to try and explain that, especially since the first person reading this might be an ATS system, applicant tracking system, which is an automated system, or it might be an HR person who has no clue about what technologies are. So there's going to match up keywords to your resume. So keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, SQL programming. So what's going to say SQL? And markup languages such as, which is interesting. That's another one of those things that kind of indicates this might have been built by an HR person. Markup languages such as HTML5. What does that actually mean? That's an interesting question. Okay, do they mean, okay, Markdown would also be applicable? Probably they mean web language. They probably just mean HTML. But again, HTML, HTML5, you want to put HTML5 on your resume to match up that keyword. Okay, I love this posting for this reason. Classroom study and personal projects are valid experience, provided the candidate can demonstrate the ability to code independently. I love that line. I love that. If you're an employer looking to hire junior developers, you need to put that line on your job postings because that right there says, hey, experience is experience. And if you can prove your experience, cool. Now, I will personally encourage you that classroom projects probably don't belong in your portfolio because you probably worked on it with somebody else. And again, code independently. If you say, well, I was on a team that did this, I don't know what you did. So show me the things that you did yourself, your personal projects. Okay. All right. Object-oriented programming and design, service-oriented architecture, inversion of control, dependency injection, REST, database normalization. So what this person is looking for, is company looking for OOP. They're looking for dependency injection. Let's put DI. REST is a keyword there. That would be for APIs. And database normalization means, again, SQL, but beyond just the basics of I can write a query. All right, just to point out, curious, creative, and enthusiastic problem solver. You can show off some of that stuff in your resume and portfolio. All right, so then we have the serverless computing. All right, so they mentioned a few different broad topics as well as AWS Lambda. So if you want to put AWS in here, that's possible. I would put cloud because often we have, especially desired qualifications, cloud is probably good enough. You can say, hey, I know these Azure services or I know these Google Cloud services. And then understand the developer's role in the CI/CD DevOps practices. Okay, so we've got CI, CD, and DevOps. Okay, that's the first one. We're going to skip over what looks like this is probably a ad, but let's just read through it real quick. .NET, C#, JavaScript, TypeScript, React. We'll put it on here. I'm going to tell you no. These two, especially if you're getting started, don't add these two because the fact that if you're focused on C#, then there's a lot of things you can do in C# that are going to focus on C#. You don't want to go learn a whole nother language, JavaScript, with another language, TypeScript, which is just a superset, with another framework, React, with things like NPM and learning how that works. And it's a lot of extra work, which means your experience gets shallower and shallower, which means that you're more like everybody else who doesn't really know much about anything, but knows a lot about a few things, or knows a little bit about a lot of things. And that's not a great place to be, because now you're in the middle of the crowd with everybody else. So I'm going to put that as I'm going to put the break right here and say, you know what, wait on these. I'm not saying don't learn them. I'm saying wait on them until later. Okay, so database experience, SQL queries, database schema development, things like star schemas, MoLab, DocumentDB, Redshift, Snowflake, Vertica, SQL Server, and Azure. Some of the stuff you're gonna be like, I don't know what that is. No worries, okay? So you don't have to match everything, but there are some things that you can think through and match, like NoSQL and Azure, and go, hey, if I had those things, I would match up with this, I would match up with this, I would match up with DocumentDB. I'm starting to match up with multiple things on this one and on the previous one. Again, DevOps, AWS, microservices. Again, that's a keyword to use, but DevOps practices. And then down here, C#, .NET, JavaScript, TypeScript, React. Again, RESTful APIs, that's right up here. So you can keep coming down here and look at a lot of this stuff is fluff. Okay, performance optimization, identify and resolve performance bottlenecks. That could be something you show off in your portfolio, or that could be a bullet point on your resume. Your resume, we'll talk about later, but your resume should have bullet points of things that are actionable that you did and measurable. So maybe optimized a database query to cut down from, or cut the performance or the time that it runs by 80%, or reduce the time from 2 minutes to 15 seconds to run, or improve performance by 83%. Like having numbers there, but then also it shows off that you identify and resolve performance bottlenecks. Okay, so down here, bachelor's degree or related field, again, probably optional, but sure. Healthcare knowledge, if you know HIPAA, it's a plus, so put that on your resume in some place. SQL, data modeling, proficiency in Git. Okay, we should definitely have that on our list. Experience in Agile, Scrum development methodologies. Knowing about Agile and Scrum is probably enough. And the reason why is because while these are pretty decent ways often of building software, and the reality is most companies do them poorly and differently. So when you might say, well, I know how to do that, and then you come in the organization, you're like, this has nothing to do with what we did. So just knowing what those concepts are is probably good enough to get started. Okay, Docker and Kubernetes. I would put Docker on here. I wouldn't put Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a very large topic. That's more down here at some point. Okay, we got AWS, we've got Azure, we've got serverless. Serverless has come up a couple times now. Data warehouse, and then we can ignore all the rest of the stuff, the raw stuff. Okay, junior software developer. Okay, this is a fun one. So using scripting or authoring languages management tools, content creation tools, applications, and digital media. What does that mean? I don't know. Website and software application designing, building, or maintaining. Or, probably and. Conferring with teams to resolve conflicts, prioritize needs, develop content criteria, or choose solutions. Okay, this is one of those things where this looks like it was written by AI. This is not a good job posting. This is how I see a lot of resumes come across my desk. You put these things in here saying, oh, that's a cool bullet point. I know how to confer with teams to resolve conflicts, prioritize needs, develop content criteria, choose solutions. What does that mean? How is that actionable? How do I know to evaluate that? How do I identify what that means for me? That's a useless bunch of fluff. Take it out. Okay? So this posting right here, it's a not great posting. Sorry, interconnect wiring. If you want help, contact me. But editing, writing, or designing website content, directing team members who produce content, again, it comes back to that first one here. I'm not sure what this even means. So most of this stuff is really irrelevant, but down here, this might be. Okay? Bachelor's degree in computer science or equivalent, that's just standard boilerplate, even though it's not actually true. Object-oriented programming design. We've already got that on the list. JavaScript, jQuery, there's one of my flags. If you saw jQuery on the list, by the way, that's incorrectly listed. It should be like this, jQuery, lowercase j, uppercase q. jQuery, HTML and CSS. What this indicates to me is that they're working on an old platform. Okay, it's not .NET 9 for sure. And here's another one, Entity Framework 6.0, that is part of .NET Framework. Okay, Bootstrap, there's another one that's good. Let's leave jQuery on the list for now. Bootstrap. Okay, working knowledge of data sources usage in a Windows network environment. That's a bad sentence. Basically what it means is, can you talk to a database? Okay, which ADO, that's one way to talk to a database. Entity Framework is another. Teller controls, experience using SSMS, database design concepts, generic lists. If you have graduated out of C#, object-oriented programming, you should know how to use generic lists. Okay, and then create sites in IIS. That's again relates back to .NET Framework because Framework only runs on IIS. Okay, so what does this tell us though? Okay, first of all, it's a bad job posting as far as poorly written and not clear. But what it does seem to be is a .NET Framework organization. You might say, well, I want to avoid that because I want to be on the modern stuff. And that's fine, although it's going to reduce greatly the number of jobs you can apply for because there are a lot of jobs, a lot of companies still working on .NET Framework. Now, there is an opportunity there. There's an opportunity to move to .NET 9, .NET 8, a modern .NET for the person who knows how to move that company forward. I just taught a course on upgrading to .NET 9, and we talked about how do you move from .NET Framework all the way forward to .NET 9. And, it's going to be a larger and larger step, but there is still a way to do it and a way to do it well, especially if you are doing web. There's a way to do side-by-side incremental update, and that's something that's important to know because you can move over an older site with a lot more steps than just it's old, it's new. Okay, you can move it over in many more steps, which means it's more likely to happen. It's more likely to be doable. So there's some opportunity here, but you also need to know older technologies. And so the point I want to make is that even though you might want to be on the latest .NET, you should know .NET Framework because it's an important skill to have because you can come in and be the bridge. You can come in, work on the old stuff, but also help move them to the new stuff. And that makes you more valuable. Okay, so let's skip on down here and look to the next one. This one, notice this is a software .NET developer. Pay is $106,000. Probably not a junior developer, but that's okay. We'll look at the requirements here. C#, .NET, ASP.NET, MVC, and Web API. That again, especially MVC, let's put it in a list here. That is going to be an indication that it might be .NET Framework. All right, so HTML, CSS, jQuery, there's another indication, and Bootstrap. Tables, triggers, and store procedures in SQL Server database. Again, that's SQL, and it's not just the basics of SQL, it's beyond that. All right, next up, and we can look at data access layer using Entity Framework, again, MVC. So a lot of this stuff, design and develop microservices with .NET Core framework. Again, they're using the .NET Core, which is an indication that they think .NET means .NET Framework. So again, you have to match that up. Design NuGet packages, follow agile methodologies, and again, microservices. So we're kind of matching these up to what we already have in our list. Let's just do a couple more. So down here, we've got Entity Framework, Azure Service Bus, Azure Functions, and Azure DevOps. So again, we've got Azure on our list, but in this particular case, I would focus in a bit more on specific Azure things. And then right down here, we have Angular Material. Okay, so this is not a beginner level job, but it's something where you could probably apply earlier on, and a lot of these skills you already have in this list if you've gone through the whole list. Angular Material, that'd be something additional to be down here to add. Okay, let's just do the one more .NET Full Stack C# Angular. So we have .NET Core, again, that's, you gotta think through, probably that's all just .NET because of the fact they say design, develop, and maintain full stack web applications using .NET Core. So that would seem to mean they want to have more cutting edge. And again, they say HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Again, you say HTML5, not HTML. And frameworks such as Angular, we have that down here. RESTful APIs, we've got that in the list. And then CI/CD pipelines, got that in the list. SQL Server, they bolded it. Or other relational databases. Again, Microsoft SQL is going to be the gold standard for if you're a C# developer. It's the most common type of SQL that a .NET shop will use, at least so far. Doesn't hurt to know other ones. In fact, it really helps, but that's the one to start with. Okay, .NET Core / Framework, aha. So they do use .NET Framework. They use Angular, React, and Vue. Okay. C# ASP.NET, they use SQL Server, and they use Postgres. Okay. So that's one to add to your list somewhere. Postgres, Entity Framework, or other ORM tools, and then RESTful APIs, JSON, OAuth, and GraphQL. That last one, I wouldn't put very high on my list, just to be clear, because GraphQL is more of a phase than it is a reality in today's industry. For a while, it's very, very popular, but it seems to be in steep decline after people realized it's very expensive to run in any type of scale unless you are at the large enough scale that you can handle things like Facebook can. Okay, so there's a weird usage spike and dip, I guess, with GraphQL. Okay, so that's the first part of our journey, which is some market research. Now it's time to do a little bit of organization of this list. Let's prioritize the list based upon what we've got. So let's start off with, just put a little bit of space here. We're going to bring up the things that are associated with just learning C# itself. So object-oriented programming, dependency injection, let's put those in the list. And let's come down here and look at some other things. I think that's, MVC. There we go. Let's put that in the list. And API. So we have API right here. I'll put REST in parentheses because if you learn API, I'm not sure if you're familiar with REST, but REST it's a buzzword people use, and it's something that it's important, but at the same time, you almost can't be fully restful in your API. So every company is a little bit different what they mean by fully restful. So just note that it's more of a buzzword than it is actual value to say REST API. It's more just people say, oh, it's an API, it must be a REST API. Now, yes, there are some things you can do to make it more RESTful, and depending on the company, learning more and understanding more about what REST is and how it works is important, but learn API first, okay? So you got API. I think that's a good start, is to have this be the first kind of category. Learning C#, learning .NET Framework and .NET or .NET Core, object-oriented programming, dependency injection, MVC, API. That's going to give you a number of these keywords that people are asking for. So you've already got a good start on a lot of the keywords. Now, the next up would be to start thinking about your database technologies probably, or your web technologies. Probably database, in my personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I would prioritize database over web. And you might say, well, Tim, everyone's asking for web. That's true. And yes, it's important to know web, but here's the deal. When it comes to getting hired, it's more about what are you going to bring to the table. If you're going to bring the same thing to the table that everyone else brings to the table, that's going to mean that you're just one of many. What you want to do instead is bring more value to the table than most people do. And one of the areas that brings a lot of value is being more proficient in your database than just, I know how to build a table, or I know how to do a select star from the table. Knowing how to evaluate the performance of your database is a huge value. So I recommend learning C#, learning your database technologies, then learning web. And yes, I recommend CSS 3 and HTML5. That's the cutting edge web that you should know. Even if you're working with older technologies, they can still take advantage of the modern web, because almost certainly they're running on modern web browsers, which still can use HTML5 and CSS3, which means when you say things like, oh, it's so hard to center a div. No, it's not. Not if you use modern web. And oh, HTML is just, divs and H1 tags. No, it's not. Not if you know HTML5. It's much more, has much more depth to it, and has much more value than just simple blocks. Okay, so we've got our C#, we've got our SQL, database, we've got our web. Now let's look at two more. Let's cut this out for now, and we're going to paste it in and come down here. There we go. And let's move JavaScript up. By the way, when you say JavaScript, learn JavaScript. Don't learn Angular, React, or Vue first. That's a framework that's built on top of JavaScript. It's not actually JavaScript itself. I mean, yes, it's written in JavaScript, but knowing how JavaScript itself works is very valuable. Learn that first. Okay? So it's kind of like learning how to build a foundation of a house before you learn how to put the roof on. Okay? Learning about Angular and React and Vue, that's the roof. JavaScript's the foundation, or at least the first floor. This is probably the foundation, CSS and HTML. So now we've got our web. Next up is the CI/CD process, DevOps. These are the processes by which you can, again, hit a lot of buzzwords. You're going to have a lot of companies looking for this stuff. It's about how to automate the process of getting your code into a working condition, whether it be working on your development server, whether it be tested before it's merged in, whether it is actually pushed to production. Whatever the case may be, knowing how to do that well is another big value to companies. And then we have our cloud, which is AWS, Azure, Google Cloud might be in there. I personally am not as huge a fan. I'm not a huge fan of that, but we can put in there serverless, and we can. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put Postgres up there, and I put Bootstrap and jQuery in with the web. But I do want to talk about something, and that is you don't have to know 3 different database types. And actually, NoSQL, there's a lot of different kinds. You want Cosmos DB or do you want MongoDB? Those are probably the big ones to know. But there's also a lot of other options out there for NoSQL. And then SQL. I mean, Postgres is technically SQL, but there's SQL, SQLite, MySQL, so many others. I would encourage you to start with one and learn it well. And in fact, my recommendation would be Microsoft SQL to start. Okay, that'd be my recommendation for your database. I would skip over these 2 and come back to them. Okay, or get familiar at the high level of these 2, but go a lot deeper with this one. Again, all this stuff you're going to come back to later. We'll talk more about coming back to these things. So HTML, CSS, HTML5, CSS3, that's the place to start. JavaScript, know at least some. jQuery, it wouldn't hurt to know how jQuery works, but don't be using jQuery normally because jQuery is only for older technologies, and even in older technologies, you can get away from it now with modern JavaScript. Modern JavaScript is so much more powerful, and the need for jQuery is almost gone. Okay, and Bootstrap, great technology to learn, not that hard to pick up. You can pick it up in a weekend probably, or a week of training, and it's going to give you a serious leg up when it comes to web development with C#, because it's again one of those things that goes hand in hand, and you can learn Bootstrap 5 is the latest Bootstrap, but you'll probably have to learn at least how to navigate with Bootstrap 3 and 4 because of the fact that you're potentially using .NET Framework, which will probably be built on an older version of Bootstrap. Okay, so we've got CI/CD, next up we've got our cloud stuff. These things down here, really important to learn. And in fact, Git is a higher priority. Let's start prioritizing here. I would put Git right up here. I would put Git, GitHub up there. And I don't just mean learn how to put your code in GitHub, but how to work with other people. And that could include GitHub Actions, which is part of CI/CD and part of DevOps. So, and then down here, these 2 technologies, Agile, Scrum, it's more methodologies, and then Docker, really valuable. It's going to improve a lot of things in your life if you learn how to use it well. So it's, again, way beyond just the idea of I put my code in a container. It's actually about how to use containers to make your CI/CD process better, make your development process better, make you faster at things, and so many other things. So now we have this prioritized list. Okay, C#, Git, database, web, CI/CD or DevOps, cloud, Agile, Scrum methodology, and Docker. That would be where the process I would go through and say, okay, that's my prioritized list. Now, these other things, if you've gone through already and you are really good at C# and you're really good at Git and you're really good at least SQL, but these others as well, and you're really good at the web and you're starting to get into DevOps, maybe you start at this part. Start CI/CD and DevOps, the cloud. Maybe you already know about Agile, Scrum enough. You start into Docker, but then you could dip into these other ones. But notice the priority list here. There's a lot of stuff before I would jump into TypeScript, React, Kubernetes, or Angular. A lot of stuff to learn first, and not just at the easy level. Not just hello world stuff. Not just I followed the tutorial and it worked the same way it worked in the tutorial. I'm talking about building real things with it. Okay, so that's your market research. That's how to build up your topic list. Let's talk about actually learning these topics. So to do that, we'll jump back into the PowerPoint and let's go to learning a logical order. I kind of laid that out for you, that logical order, but it's important to learn in a logical order. Too often I see developers who are learning who start with, I've never learned C# before, but I want to build a web app. So let's learn Blazor. That's the wrong place to start because In order to use Blazor, well, now you have to know about Blazor itself, and you have to learn about deep object-oriented programming in C# and C# in general. But then you also have to know about Bootstrap, you have to know about HTML5 and CSS3, and you have to know about web servers, and you have to know potentially about things like SignalR or WebAssembly and maybe progressive web applications. There's a lot of stuff to learn. Well, what that's going to do is going to be very discouraging, and it's going to mean that even if you limp your way through, you'll have an extremely shaky foundation to build upon. You want to have a rock-solid foundation that you build upon level by level so that you can be confident going into your job interviews. Okay, number 2, go beyond the intro-level training material. Intro level is very popular, and intro level people kind of stop at and say, okay, I'm good. I've followed after the intro level. I may have even followed along and built the same demo the presenter built. That's not nearly good enough to actually be of value in the real world. You go way beyond that. And a lot of that comes down to practicing each topic 2 to 5 times. What I mean by that is build something tiny. It does not have to be something real, as in, has a value to the community and is, something people would buy. But instead, just an app that tests out what you know about what you just learned. And I say 2 to 5 because I want you to continue to push the boundaries, push the edges, try out things that weren't in the tutorial. Figure out how it really works, because only then do you start to get a better grasp of what you just learned. And then focus on real-world experience rather than just demo material. So you want to focus in on, okay, I just learned about maybe Blazor is a topic. Okay, I learned about Blazor and we built a sample Blazor website. Cool. Now let's build something that I might build for a client. Nothing huge, something tiny, but maybe I build out a web application for a pizza restaurant. And I have the ordering process, I have the shopping cart process, I have the log in, log out process, I have the process of loading data onto the site and capturing people's orders and tracking stock and the level of materials we have in-house. All of that stuff. Build something real world like that, not just a demo where it's like, I've put data on the screen. That's great. That's awesome. But it's not real world enough, because in the real world, what happens is it gets messy. You're like, oh, how do I do that? How do I integrate authentication into this process? How do I track things like 2 people ordering at the same time? And we only have 1 in stock. What do I do? And how do I communicate with the user? Can I send emails to the user? All that information is stuff that you come across when you try and build a real world application rather than just a demo that is simplistic. Okay, so that's how to do some market research. That's how to learn the top topics. Okay, now let's talk about building portfolio pieces, because that's the next step in our process. We have worked on our skills. We've worked on our experience. Our experience is actually building real world projects, not just demo materials. So next up, build portfolio pieces. Okay, so we want to focus on relevant pieces. All right, so what I mean by this is it's great that you built a game in school. That's kind of awesome, but unless you're applying to be a game developer, probably isn't really relevant to an employer looking to hire you to build web applications for a bank. All right, so focus on relevant pieces that are relevant to the general industry you're applying for. Like we saw in that list of different job postings, a lot of it has to do with building web applications, has to do with building .NET applications that talk to a database. Like, these are common things that even across different types of jobs still apply. So build portfolio pieces that are relevant to that broader idea. Also, use pictures or GIFs, and yes, it's GIFs, not GIFs. Use pictures or GIFs to show relevant parts. All right, so you don't have to, like, let's say you build a desktop application And people say to me, oh, I can't put that in my portfolio because it's a desktop application. Absolutely you can. Take pictures, okay? Use screenshots. Take pictures of the relevant things, and that should be true even for web apps. You don't want to make them go away to somewhere else to find your web application to see how it works to come back to see the explanation. Take pictures and show the relevant parts. Use GIFs if there's some type of interaction you want to show off. All right? Next up, use a short list of technologies used. Include a short list of technologies used. So what this is talking about is you want to be very clear about, hey, I used CI/CD, I used Azure DevOps, I used Azure Web Apps, I used C#, I used .NET 9, I used .NET Framework. Like, show off what you did, but then be very clear about that in that list. Not huge. You don't want to put 30 things in that list, but maybe 5 things. If it's relevant, a few more than that. But have your list of these are the things I used in this portfolio piece, so they know, oh, he used that. Oh, she used that. Have a brief description. People love to write paragraphs of information that describe all the things that their wonderful application did. That's great. No one's reading it. Okay? If you get paragraphs and paragraphs of information, do you read it? No. Okay? Instead, write a brief description, a couple of sentences that explain what this thing does. And then have a link to the code or the working app or both. So if you have preferably a GitHub, GitHub repo with your code, because it should be open source if it's in your portfolio. Ideally, it doesn't have to be. If it's a thing you sell, cool. Don't give the code away, but show the working app. It's still really impressive. You have an application you're actually selling to customers, even if only a few people bought it. So, but either way, have a link to the code or the working app or both to show off that piece. So let's see an example of this in action. Again, we're going to bounce out of the PowerPoint and we're going to go to the suggestion site. So my suggestion site here is something I wrote or I built on screen. It's actually one of the courses I give away for free on my YouTube channel. And this could be an example of a portfolio piece. So let's minimize this, and I'm going to shrink this down because I want to have, a nice screenshot that's going to be, something not the full screen, but I want to get as much as possible into it. Actually, go popular, not to new, and note how we can, include things that have colors, and this is kind of a good screenshot to show off. And I'll bring Microsoft Word over here, so I'm ready to capture it. So if you didn't know, if you're in Windows Shift S can bring up this dialog that allows you to take screenshots, and sure, it looks about right. And I can go over here to Word. I'm going to pretend that Word is the place I'm putting my portfolio piece. I paste it in. So now I have this layout that shows off the most important pieces of my app. Now I might come over here and go to Suggest, which actually is going to pop up this. I could do a screenshot of the login box. I'm not going to sign in right now. But I could go into this microservices thing and take a screenshot of this. A couple of screenshots would be good. Different areas, different parts of it. If I was logged in, I would create a suggestion as well and have the picture of that. Or maybe filter down to only certain types if I wanted to. But like that's the start of my portfolio. Then I come over here, or my portfolio piece. So that'd be a screenshot I'd grab. I'd grab a few like this. Then let's come down here and let's talk about the other parts to this. So I would have maybe a title. So something like .NET 8 suggestion site. It's .NET 8 right now. It's actually .NET 9 very, very shortly. The upgrade process, pretty easy, pretty awesome. So that went really, really smoothly. So, title, and I'd have a bit of a description, or I'd have the relevant technologies. I'd probably do relevant technologies first. Now, if I were building a suggestion site, I would not have it just be bullet points underneath that, and actually have it be a list that's wide, or maybe have a separate column next to this that has the relevant technologies. But we're just doing this in Word as a demo. So I would say something like C#, ASP.NET Core, Web API. I would probably say, I should probably put in here for C#, and I would say .NET 8, maybe in parentheses, like that. Web API, we have ASP.NET Core, Blazor Server. Actually, you know what? I didn't use an API for this. I'm sorry. Blazor Server, Azure Active Directory, B2C, that's our authentication system. SendGrid, that's how you send emails. And then you have a few more that we could add. Oh, MongoDB. But then we do have Azure Key Vault, we have Azure Web App, and we have Serilog, and we also use Seek. So right now I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 technologies. That's quite a bit. And what I would do probably is pare this down based upon what's most important or most relevant. And this could change potentially based upon who you're applying to. Now, it's hard to change portfolio items, and it would take a customized portfolio site, or a portfolio site allows you to customize in order to do this. So you don't have that. Maybe something like take the Blazor Server off and take off Azure Key Vault, at least your Azure Web App there. That cuts us down to 7. Maybe that's okay. That might be, we could even potentially do like that, which, by the way, say Blazor instead of Blazor Web App or Blazor Server. It's actually Blazor Server, because really they're very close, and so that covers a broader range. Maybe don't do SendGrid. It depends on if we've seen that pop up before, but you kind of want to show a little bit of complexity in this app. So kind of fight through and say, okay, what can we do to make sure we don't overwhelm people? Because a list that's too long, people will not read. A list that's too short means the application is too simple. So you want to have the right size list. It's the Goldilocks and the Three Bears kind of thing, right? So you want to make sure you hit the middle, the just right. This is on the higher end edge of just right, okay? So that might be okay, or you might want to cut it down and get rid of maybe Azure Web App, but I don't think so. I might get rid of Serilog Seek. Okay, that's probably the next thing to get rid of. There we go. So now you have 6. That's good. All right. So when it comes to building portfolio pieces and your resume as well, you're going to want to be ruthless. You don't want to, you don't want to make this overwhelming. You don't want to make it too wordy. You want to edit, edit, edit. You want to cut this down, because if no one's going to read it, then it doesn't matter how awesome you think it is. If no one's going to read it, it's not valuable. So you want to make sure that it's something people are going to read. 6 bullet points is skimmable. You can skim through that. Okay, now it comes to our description. So the description for this, I might say something like, the suggestion site is a Blazor Server app that stores video suggestions. Let's say training suggestions. Training suggestions, and allows users to vote on their favorite suggestions. Is hosted on an Azure Web App, has served thousands of visitors, and is in production today. Okay, so what we've done here is we've dropped a few more hints. And in fact, we could probably drop off this blazer here. We did mention it down here, but it might be okay to leave it there. But notice we've kind of done some callbacks here to our technologies, but given a larger picture of what this does. It's not just here's all the technologies, but why does this website exist? What does it do? What does it perform? But we have things like has served thousands of visitors. That indicates it's in use and it has been useful to people. And it is in production today. Okay, so now you know, okay, it's not just a demo piece, but it's actually something you're using. So again, you can show off, even if you're just showing off screenshots, you can show off that this is a relevant, valuable app. And then again, I would put a URL here, so site, https, suggestions.imtimcorey.com. All right, so now they have the URL to go to actually see this site in action, interact with it, and so on. This site isn't an open source application. Okay, so this is a closed source application. I did show you how to build the entire thing. You could build the entire thing based upon watching my videos, or if you actually own the course, you can download the source code. Although it's not to give away or post yourself, but yeah. So I wouldn't have a GitHub link to post, but I do have the production URL to post. And again, if it's a closed source desktop application, maybe you post a link to the item in the store where they can't even actually see it work, but they can see more screenshots, they can see user reviews, they can see how many times it's been downloaded potentially. Like, it gives them a lot more information to go on, and it again builds up that credibility. So that's a portfolio piece. Now you want to put it in a nice format, make it laid out nicely, put a couple more screenshots that you can cycle through. There's a lot of things you could do to make this look nice, but now you've learned how to take an application you built and turn it into a portfolio item. So that's our third spot on that circle. Let's talk about the next spot, which is that we want to design your resume. So keep it simple, lots of white space, okay? Too often I see resumes that come across my desk that are jam-packed with tons of information, and every potential spot on the page is used. And when you have looked at hundreds of resumes in a day, it just makes your eyes glaze over. I don't actually see anything on that page because it's just too much. It's too much. And along with this comes the avoid paragraphs and favor bullet points. Now, we all know this to an extent, but bullet points are easier to consume than paragraphs of information. In fact, you right now are consuming bullet points, one at a time, bullet points. And honestly, there's a lot of information even on these slides because I want to get it in there, but at the same time, it's a lot. And if this was a resume, it'd probably be too much. So you want to reduce how much you say. And you might say, well, Tim, I have to leave off relevant information. That's true, kind of. We saw in the portfolio piece when I was building it, yeah, there's a lot more technologies in that portfolio piece than I listed because I wanted to get it down to a bullet point list people would actually read. So I picked the most important ones, the most relevant ones. And if I had a conversation with somebody, we could talk about the more stuff in there than just what I listed. But if they're not going to read it, then it's not helping you to put more stuff. If you write a paragraph about all the stuff you did at your job, I'm not reading that. That's too much information. You need to be scannable with your resume. So avoid paragraphs, favor bullet points, and don't write too many bullet points. A job should probably have 3 to maybe 5, more likely 4. Try 3 to 4 bullet points. That's it. And those bullet points should not wrap. You should have no more than one line, and honestly, it should not fill up the entire line, regardless of how much space you give your work experience column. it shouldn't take up the full line with each bullet point. All right? You want to allow the person to quickly skim through your resume and catch the important parts in highlight format. Number 3, focus on measurable outcomes. So when you talk about your time at work, you don't want to talk about, oh, I worked on a team. We collaborated together. I led a group to work on a major part of our application. What value does that show me? I mean, it's a lot of information, a lot of words without actually telling me anything. So instead, focus on, led team to improve app efficiency by 15%. That's measurable, that's short, and that's clear as to what you did. If you say worked on a team that, it's not as great because of the fact that you're not telling us what you did, what part of that was yours. All right? So again, if you worked on a team that made your app more efficient, great. What part did you do and how much did that add to the overall performance improvements? Maybe your job was focused on one store procedure and you reduced the runtime from 1 minute down to 6 seconds. Okay? So improved store procedure performance by 10 times. Or reduced performance runtime by whatever 1/6 is percentage, by, was it 80%-ish? So do something like that where you're like, improved performance by 84% on a store procedure. Now you've got something measurable that you can show off in a bullet point. Also, utilize relevant keywords. Remember back when we talked about we were looking through some market research, we found all those different words, and some companies say things like .NET Core, and they use ASP.NET, or they use other terms that aren't quite what you would have in your resume. Maybe you say C# a lot, but you can just change C# to .NET because C# is .NET. .NET isn't always C#, just to be clear. But you could say .NET and say, I built web applications in .NET or even .NET Core. So using relevant keywords, because the fact that first scan is going to come through an ATS or through an HR person that doesn't know what those keywords mean and how they translate into other keywords. So utilize relevant keywords. This is also why when you look at your resume, you probably should take off things that aren't relevant. So if you have a bunch of keywords on there that just don't apply to other companies, maybe you work on a specific content management system. Well, unless you're applying to work on that content management system, don't have those keywords in there because they don't have any value there. All right. Customize your resume per application. Every time you apply, you want to customize your resume. And you might say, Tim, that's too much work. Well, guess what? Every time you customize your application, you increase your chance of success significantly. Now, I don't care if that increase goes from 0.1% to 1%. You might say, well, that's a nothing improvement. Actually, it's not. It's 10 times as valuable. And sure, you may have to apply 100 times, but it's different. It's better than 1,000 times, right? Like, that's the difference. So, and I can't tell you an exact percentage of how much more valuable it is because I'm making stuff up and I don't want to do that. But instead, I want to tell you that it is absolutely worth it. Because again, the first line of defense for a lot of companies is going to be an HR person or an ATS that does not understand that when you say C#, you mean .NET. Or when you say .NET 8, you mean .NET Core. Like, it doesn't know those translations. So if you just customize to match their keywords without really, you're not lying, you're not changing your experience. What you're doing is focusing in on what are they asking for and how can I make sure that what I have can better match up with what they're asking for. That right there will be a big difference. Also, you might have 10 things you did at a job, 10 different cool things you did. You only want to list 3 to 4, but the three to four that you list can be different based upon the job you're applying to. Because maybe one job is focused heavily on SQL, another job is focused heavily on Azure. Well, you can pull out the relevant points that for your last job that apply, and now your resume looks even better. So customize it per application. That does not mean starting from scratch every time. That means have a template resume that has everything in it. And then have cut it down to just what you need for that particular job application and tweak the keywords. That's all you have to do. It shouldn't take you more than 5 to 15 minutes per application to apply with a customized resume for that job. But when you do, you will see a difference in your outcomes. All right, so now you have a resume set up. Apply frequently, right? You're going to apply a lot, and you might be frustrated by that. It might take you time, and you might say, well, I've applied to 15 places today, and I've heard nothing back. I've applied to 20 places this week, and I haven't heard anything back. It's going to happen. You're going to have to work this process. So let's talk about how to apply well. So first of all, apply to jobs you're even possibly qualified to do. We saw in the that first section where we're talking about like looking through Indeed and looking at those job postings. Some of those postings are kind of ridiculous. Okay, they're kind of not realistic for the type of job it is. But here's the deal: that's an opportunity, because people who are qualified to do everything they ask for aren't going to get paid enough based upon what they're offering. So they're not going to necessarily take the job, which means that a person that's probably not fully qualified will get the job. And so it's possible that you could get that job even though you don't have all the qualifications. They might have to settle for you. Now, it sounds bad, right? It sounds like, oh man, they're settling for me. I don't really like that. Well, every time an employer asks for a new employee, they're going to shoot for the moon. They look at they're a kid in the candy store and it's like, I want one of everything. But the reality is they need a chocolate bar. They need a chocolate bar, and if you can come in with a chocolate bar that also has a pack of Skittles attached to it, that might be perfect for what they need, even though you've asked for the entire candy store. So apply to jobs they're even remotely qualified to do. Now, be realistic. If you have never worked as a C# developer professionally, don't apply for senior level positions. Just don't do that. And if they ask for 10 years work experience and you have no years work experience, don't apply for those jobs. But if you're close, like if you have a few of the major technologies and a couple of the ones that are preferences, that's awesome. You are well qualified. Apply to that job. Utilize your network of contacts to get into potential jobs. So knowing people is important. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? Well, that's actually true. And you might groan at that and say, oh, I hate that. Accept reality. The reality is that knowing people is going to give you a leg up on getting a job. So work on that, which means meeting developers. Meet developers at meetups. Meet developers at conferences. Do you know there are developer conferences that are free or practically free? I was just at one a little while ago that the conference was $30 to get into. And it was a 2-day conference. I've been at conferences where it's a 1-day conference that costs $10. Like, you can get into cheap conferences. You can attend online ones, but they're not as valuable because the purpose of you attending a conference or attending a meetup isn't about the thing that you learn as much. Now, that's still valuable. The people training you are giving you great content. Take full advantage of that. Learn from them. However, the biggest value you get from a conference or a meetup or other type of developer event is meeting people. Spend a lot of time talking to people. At that last conference where I was there for 2.5 days, I was there for a pre-day and then 2 full days, I spent about 50% of my time during the conference hours talking to people, and then I spent almost all of my evenings talking to people because networking is super valuable in this industry and most industries. So utilize your network of contacts, which means starting by building a network of contacts, but utilize that network to get you into potential jobs. Customize your resume per job. We talked about this already, but I wanted to reiterate this. When you apply frequently, don't just shotgun blast your resume out there. Be intentional. Customize your resume. Increase your odds. If there's only 100 jobs in your area, you don't want to burn those bridges by, not putting your best foot forward every time. Because if you only have 100 jobs that are potential, and you probably have more than that, but there's only 100 jobs in your area that are potential, and you waste your effort on 90% of them by not being directly, keyword matched, well, then you didn't get into, you didn't have even a shot at 90 of them. Well, if you don't even have a shot at 90 out of 100, that's not great odds of getting a job. But if you customize and get to that first step, maybe you have a shot at 50 of those. That's a whole lot better odds. So customize your resume per job. And then reevaluate and adjust constantly. You always want to be saying, what could I do differently? What could I do better? If you have the opportunity to talk to a person after they reject you, take full advantage of that. Say, hey, could you let me know what it was that made you not want to move forward with me? Is there something I could improve? Is it something I could change? What was it that you wanted to see different? Now, a lot of times employers will say, I can't tell you that, or they ignore you. And that's not because they're jerks. It's because of a couple things. One, when you have hundreds of people applying, that's a lot. And then two, that also opens up for liability. If they tell you, well, you weren't good enough compared to somebody else, well, that could be something that you could argue then, and then you could potentially sue them for, and that wouldn't be ideal. So a lot of lawyers tell them, don't talk to people. Now, like for example, I will talk to you. I'll tell you why, and it might be, well, you're great, but there's people that are greater. And that's okay. That's going to happen. But have that conversation if you can. Talk to other people, your friends, your network of contacts. Say, hey, can you look over this and see as this resume, what do you see that needs to be changed? Look at this portfolio. What do you see here that could be improved? You have to check your ego at the door and be honest about evaluating what you're doing and improve over time. So that's the cycle. So you start with figuring out what skills to get and then getting those skills. You talk about experience and getting that experience. And then we talk about building a portfolio and then building a resume that reflects what you can do, but then continuing to improve your skills, continuing to improve your experience, continuing to improve your portfolio, and continuing to update that resume. So it's not enough that once you get to the resume step, you go, okay, I'm done, now I just apply. No. Once you're at the resume step, you start over at skills and add more skills and add more experience. Continue to grow. I want to show you something though. And this, yes, will be a bit of a shameless plug, and that's okay. But let's bring up again that list of training, okay? Because this is something that I work really hard at. My goal is to make you a real-world developer, not just give you fun training that you collect or that you say, hey, Tim does cool stuff. Nope, that's not my goal. My goal is to set you up for success in a modern development environment in the modern job market. So let's take our list right here and go to I Am Tim Corey. I Am Tim Corey, where I have my paid training courses. Let's go to all courses and let's look at, let's look at this list. So we have our C# content, C#, .NET Framework, .NET Core, Object-Oriented Programming, Dependency Injection, MVC, API. Guess what? That's all in the C# Master Course. The C# Master Course has all of that. It's got 70 hours plus. It's got all of that, but even more. All right. In fact, if we look, it also covers SQL. It also covers NoSQL. It covers a bit of the web, not much. It covers a little bit of cloud with Azure and serverless. So it doesn't just cover this, it covers a bunch more. But then you say, well, Git and GitHub. Well, we have down here Git from start to finish, and down here we have Accelerate GitHub. 2 courses that focus on getting this information. And by the way, Microsoft SQL, you want to go deeper, Accelerate SQL is right there. And then you say, well, HTML5 and CSS3, modern web development. Yep, that's right here under web development. We cover HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, both the beginner and advanced 43 hours of training. There's a bunch of stuff in here, including bonuses, and including we build more than one website in this course. Okay, so we also have a bonus where we talk about actually building I Am Tim Corey. And I bring the team in, we talk about how we built this site itself using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So then Bootstrap, let's skip jQuery because jQuery, I don't cover that, at least not for now. Bootstrap, well, there's right here, Bootstrap 5 from start to finish. So we cover in 7.5 hours a bunch of stuff about Bootstrap, how it works, how to use it well, how to customize it using SCSS, how to use components, how to do styling, how to do multiple layouts for desktop, tablet, mobile, and all the rest, how to use modern CSS stuff inside of it, like grid and flex, and work with the Bootstrap grid inside of these. So bunch of stuff in there. And then CI/CD and DevOps, we have a DevOps from start to finish course. We have the GitHub course, which covers some GitHub actions as well. And then for cloud, I focus mainly on Azure, which is right here, Azure from start to finish. We cover a bunch of Azure Web Apps, Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, SignalR, Key Vault, storage, functions, Service Bus, and more. Basically, all the keywords you saw about Azure in those job postings, they're all covered here. Okay, and serverless, I have a whole course on Azure Functions, which is part of the serverless ecosphere. I don't have Agile Scrum yet. I'm interested to see if people are interested in that. But Docker, I have a course on Docker. And it's not just the basics of Docker, it's a whole lot more. Building a Docker file, Docker options, Docker containers, images, commands, using .NET with Docker. So again, this is all about real-world training. Now, why do I say this? Is it just a promo for what I do? Well, kind of. But at the same time, the point here is that the reason I build these courses is not just because, oh, I need another course. No, it's about building things that are relevant to you today to modernize your skills, to prepare you for the job market, and to prepare you in a real-world way, not just in a tutorial way. This isn't about tutorials. It's about training you to be a real-world developer based upon my 30 years of skill in the industry and my ability to train you like a senior developer would at an actual job. Okay? So that's why I have all of these courses. And there's more too. Like we talked about, database DevOps or Azure Active Directory B2C. There's lots of stuff in here and more coming of things that I've covered. But the point here is that when you look at today's job market, I've covered a ton of that in my courses because I want you to be prepared. The cool thing is you come up here to DevPass and hit subscribe. You get the DevPass. The DevPass has all of my courses. All of my courses that are publicly available are in the DevPass for one rate. Okay? It's a monthly rate. It's a yearly rate. Notice, by the way, this says $65 and $650. When you see this video, these will have changed. It will say $55 a month, and it will say $595 a month. We're actually reducing the prices of our DevPass because of the fact that we think it's important to give you the best opportunity to be successful. And while our prices are in US dollars and they aren't cheap. We want to make sure that we do all we can to help you succeed. So again, $55 a month, by the way, that's in US dollars. If it's in your currency, it'll be a bit different. And if you have VAT, that will be different because VAT adds to that. So that does not include VAT if you're in Europe. But if you notice back in all courses, $500, $500, and then down here, Azure is $97, Blazor is $197, Bootstrap is $97. Like those add up quite quickly to thousands of dollars in courses, which you get lifetime access. It's super valuable. And quite frankly, just a C# Master course alone is more content than you get in multiple years at college. But if you go the route of subscribing, well, you get all of that at $55 per month for however long you need it. So it's a much better deal, or $595 a year. If you want to go that route, you can save even more money. And by the way, one more thing, DevPass Business. If you are working in a company and your company has the Visual Studio subscriptions, check out my.visualstudio.com and see if you have the access to get a reduced rate on the DevPass Business. It's a really great rate for DevPass Business if you subscribe to Visual Studio, thanks to Microsoft. So that might be an even cheaper way of getting access to this training. Again, the point here is to give you real-world training that prepares you to get a job. Because when it comes to getting a job, it's not just about trying and just applying. It's about having a clear plan and working that plan effectively and efficiently. And that's what I try and do, is to make this list as efficient as possible so that you're prepared. Okay? So that's a kind of a side note about why I do what I do and why I have a paid training plan. By the way, all my paid training goes to fund more free content, because it's not just about doing paid stuff, it's about providing you with good free content, which is why I have over 700 videos here on YouTube to help you out. Okay? So that's the C# Developer's Guide to Getting Hired in 2025. You have a plan, you have the roadmap for what to do, you have the steps to take, you've seen the things to do in what order. Now it's time for you to work the plan. I can't wait to see what you do. I have heard from so many people how they got jobs, they got better jobs, they are in a different place, a better place as a software developer because they worked this type of plan. So I want to hear your stories as well in the next coming year. So work the plan and get that job.